This is a bit of a stretch, but if you want to see where that can lead to in some societies, particularly when times get very tough, lots of unemployment, look right now at South Africa. Now, we've already heard a lot about black attacks on white farmers, attacks encouraged by racist politicians like Julius Malema. But what we aren't hearing much about are murders, particularly this past fortnight, of black foreigners in South Africa, foreign workers from countries like Nigeria. Now, just in the past week and a half, we've had 12 people murdered in South Africa, and riots and foreign-owned shops being looted. Well, Tim Butcher is a journalist, broadcaster, he's an author, even winner of the Royal Scottish Geographical Society's Mungo Park Medal for exploration, mainly of Africa. He joins me from Cape Town. Great to see you, Tim. Tim, how serious are these latest riots?
Well, very serious, as you quite rightly flag up. 12 dead, but hundreds arrested, 639 at the last count, and dozens of businesses destroyed, livelihoods destroyed, predominantly amongst the foreign worker population. It's important also to rein in. Remember that when a mob gets out of control, it's pretty badly organised. It doesn't focus. So of those 12 deaths, 2 were of South Africans, of locals. So it's not just exclusively of foreigners, but it's a very messy, muddy situation when you have a police system that can't control. There you've got images there of mob violence at its worst. It is scary to see. And the tragedy is in South Africa is it's not the first time. We've had episodes of this in this century, post-apartheid, the era of the Rainbow Nation, of Desmond Tutu, of Nelson Mandela, of Invictus, of the Rugby World Cup of '95. Those are all nice images, but the reality is these things flare up. We had a bad one in 2008, and this is the worst since then.
Well, actually, the initial footage I just showed of people in a car being attacked, it actually comes from Nigeria, because crowds there have reacted to the killing of Nigerians in these riots in South Africa. Crowds in Nigeria have responded by burning South African-owned businesses, attacking motorists who seem South African. How bad has the reaction from other countries been?
Well, it's a fair point. It has spread like a sort of contagion. When Nigerians are targeted in Johannesburg, then back in Nigeria, then South African businesses. Similarly, Mozambique, country next door to South Africa. There's been some response, and the Mozambicans are shocked. The Angolans are absolutely distraught that some of their businesses and some of their compatriots are being targeted. So it spreads like a contagion. And, I don't need to tell any of your viewers that, black violence in Africa can take so many more lives than the one that you referred to in introduction that we look at in South Africa. We just have to cast our mind back to 1994 and Rwanda. I mean, this is where these differences and their divisiveness can ultimately lead if the leadership fails and if the economy fails to uplift.
You're right to remind us of Rwanda. I went to a church there just after a massacre. I'll never forget the sight. A first church I've seen where the floor is entirely covered in blood. But what is driving this particular upheaval? I know there's been tensions between immigrant workers and locals. What's driven this latest uptick?
Well, in the simplistic answer, it's the economy stupid, isn't it? It's the fact that there are so many legions of unemployed South Africans, so many legions of desperately poor South Africans, people who've been deracinated, picked up from their homes way off in the rural countryside, come to Johannesburg, to the big city, and they find themselves sleeping in townships, sleeping in shanties. They look at a business, it's successful, the lights are on, money is exchanging hands, and then they make a connection. It's not run by someone from South Africa. And you could see that, these are the sort of logical, almost sort of historically grounded processes. Jewish pogroms in Russia come to mind. Who are the successful people? You target them at the times of tough economic conditions. But of course, the word economy or economics loses sight of much more richer things, much more important cultural realities, which is that in South Africa, society has been so derooted, deracinated. People have been taken away from homes. They've been depersonalized. Their families have been broken down. That human warmth, that human empathy for their fellow neighbour. That has been worn pretty thin over decades, and you could say centuries. And so in a way, economics is the basic answer. Yes, there's terrible unemployment. Yes, there's terrible poverty. But where does this violence come from? This ability to flip so quickly? And that's a fundamental question that South Africa is asking itself today.
Well, can I pick up on something you just touched on before when you went through the roll call of, great South African figures of the past, the Mandelas and all that. When South Africa got rid of apartheid, Nelson Mandela became president, there was so much hope, so much hope. Now, I know South Africa is still Africa's richest country, but what does this particular, this unrest now and 33% plus unemployment, what is it telling us about South Africa today?
Well, you're quite right to say it's the richest country in Africa, but also another slightly more subtle but very important thing, it's also the most unequal country in Africa. Lots of very, very wealthy people have continued to become even wealthier since 1994, which is the timeline we're talking about. But it's the vast cohort who are left behind, and the fact that the Keynesian process hasn't led through to them, hasn't led, it's with the multiplier effect to incomes going up and tax yields increasing so that public health improves and schools. That's the problem. There's the disconnect. The fact that this country is the richest, but it's also, and if you measure it, the statisticians, they bring out that great thing, the Gini coefficient, which always gets me to scratch my head a little bit, but that's their measure for inequality. And the sad truth is South Africa has the highest Gini coefficient in the continent. And it's that sense of the vast cohort being left behind. The ANC, the African National Congress, the beloved party of Nelson Mandela, committed itself to everyone, to all ethnicities, all colours, all faiths in this country. But the sad truth is, as a leadership, as a government that has been in control, it has left so many people behind. It has stolen the money. The corruption has bled it off. It's not gone to schools. It's not gone to job opportunities. It's not gone to healthcare. And people are getting to that stage where, well, they're going back to the basics, which is I gather my kin around me. I gather my group. And if necessary, we take to arms. We take to the worst weapons possible.
No, gee, it's so sad. I mean, I've got relatives living in South Africa, in some trickier places, and well, they tell me the precautions they need to take. It's not good. But finally, what does this tell us more broadly about Africa, the continent? We don't actually focus much anymore in Australia on Africa below the Sahara. It's like there's just been too much woe. We don't care anymore. What does it say that South Africa, for all its problems, still attracts so many workers from other parts of the continent?
Well, going back to that point we've just been discussing, that there's a failure, a grotesque, colossal, continent-wide failure of leadership, not just in South Africa, but in the countries further north. Zimbabwe, they're burying Robert Mugabe, the worst dictator that South Africa has seen in 30 years. They're burying him this weekend. We go further north to the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. It's not really a republic, and it's not really democratic. It's a terrible, terrible mess. We spin round the corner to Sierra Leone, a country I know well, to Liberia, to Ivory Coast, which has had its own war, and Cameroon, and so it goes on. What's the issue? The actual central kernel here is the failure of leadership. The money comes in, taxes are generated at the border, tariffs are there, there's an income stream, there's aid money in vast amounts that comes in, but it fails to go down and bed down to the masses, and that's the problem, and that's the key here. And that in a way we can point the figure and say colonialism for 140 years, colonialism. Come on, this has now been 40 years, 50 years, 60 years cycle of the independence period. The crucial thing here is the failure of the leaders, and you could run, one after the other. Joseph Kabila, Robert Mugabe, Dos Santos, one after the other. The names you're familiar with. They've stolen the money. They've gone and had hospitals treatment overseas. They've banked their money overseas. They don't live here in Africa. They don't importantly pay tax here in Africa, and that is the issue. And it's that failure to give a decent example that means the masses are left fending for themselves. And that means, as I say, taking up weapons occasionally. So we have the violence we saw so grotesquely in Johannesburg last weekend. Yeah,
well, I once read a book by Yoweri Museveni, who's Uganda who was saying, oh, look, there's the big man culture of Africa, but, you know, we're changing that, and I still haven't seen any change. It's such a deep shame. Tim Butcher, thank you so much indeed for your time.
My great pleasure.